Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of Quizzing Cameron, where I take your leadership and management questions and give my best shot at trying to answer them. One thing I wanted to mention right from the get-go is there's a lot of questions that are submitted, and I do promise to get to every single non-derogatory question that comes my way. It might take me a few episodes to get through those, but trust me, I will go ahead and get through all of them for you. So if you do come across a question, you get inspired by something that's being said and you want to ask me something, go ahead and respond to this video and I will be cataloging all of those and getting to them in some future episode. So with that said, let's dive into the first question. Our first question is from Marie. It's, what are some tips you have for a young manager managing veteran employees who have 5 times the experience? Well, first of all, congratulations, Marie. I trust this is you that's asking the question. And it's not uncommon by any stretch of the imagination to be managing someone who perhaps was a peer prior to your promotion and someone who's been there for quite some time. The main thing that veteran employees want is they want respect. They want you to respect the time that they've put in the organization and respect their experience. So the easiest way to do that is to simply bring them into the conversation, involve them in the decisions, ask them what they think would be best based on their experience. Call it out if you need to, but keep them involved. And truthfully, you should be doing this with every single employee that you have. It shouldn't just be the veterans. You should be bringing everybody in. The new hires have a fresh perspective that the veterans don't necessarily have, but that's always my advice when dealing with either those that are a generation ahead of you, but those that have that experience in the specific job, is just respect their experience, ask them their thoughts on what's going on and what you should be doing, and involve them in the process as it launches. So, good question, Marie. Next question is from Janny. She asks, I am a regional manager, a merchandising manager for a company in North Carolina. How can I motivate about 30 store managers so that they can see the bigger picture? Jenny, another great question, and I think the main thing is to broaden their perspective. You want them to see the bigger picture, so go ahead and expose them to that bigger picture. What I truthfully recommend is that you start reporting sales results for the entire region, all 30 stores. You can rank them however you want. You can rank them by sales. Another way to do it that I like is actually year-over-year percentage increase. So those locations that aren't in the prime markets get the sort of exposure that they want to get for the improvements that they're making. So send that out. Have them post it up in the break room where the store sits on just a couple of different metrics, but get them thinking outside the box. You also asked a question in regards to merchandising, and having a little bit of experience from a past life in retail, I know how tough that can be to get some sort of consistency across all of your stores. My advice really is to start taking photos and sending that out to the different stores. Really start getting into emailing the entire store management team. And with these photos, I want you to start naming names. So you're giving the acknowledgement to the store that's doing a particularly great job if they've set up a display particularly well or did something particularly well. So you're giving them that sense of a pride and accomplishment, but you're also inspiring those other stores to go above and beyond and try to, outmatch each other. You want a little bit of competition. Both of these suggestions get to competition. And you want it to be a healthy competition as much as possible. So there's no downside to any of this. You just see it. Maybe you, and on your round, you make sure to include one picture of one thing that's going particularly well from a store and that you'd like to see in the other locations. But start that communication. It sounds like you're probably the hub of communication in those 30 stores. So really start trying to communicate to the group. And if you can find some way of getting them talking to one another and sharing best practices, then that would be the next step on top of that. Our third question comes from Diana. The question is, if you know something is not right on a professional level, but were told to do it by your boss, would you do it? I qualify these into 2 different categories. The first one is I don't necessarily think you're getting at it, but I will address it, and that is if you are asked by your boss to do something that is not legal or is against company policy. And I always advise to not do it regardless of whether the boss has told you. You have plausible denial if somebody says, oh, if for some reason discipline starts taking place. You have plausible denial for saying the boss told me to do this. I told him I couldn't do it because of this policy, and you have your ground to stand on at that point. The other one is on a professional level, and I call it kind of a difference of opinion. These come up regularly where your boss asks you to do something that you don't think is the right decision, that you take a different course of action to address whatever need it is that is getting addressed. And my response is to almost always follow what the boss says. I've been in the personal position of being vehemently against particular courses of action that my boss has laid out, and sure enough, come a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, I find that turned out to be the correct course of action. It happens on a regular basis, and it irritates me every single time that it happens. But they have a perspective that you don't necessarily have. And that's not saying that you're not great at what you're doing and you don't have the bigger picture in mind, but they might be attuned to different things that are happening in different departments. They also might have a little bit more experience. And so it's always best to follow the boss's direction. Now, in those cases where you are really dead set against it, just two pieces of advice that I will give for you on that. If you really think it's detrimental to the company, you can try to delay it. Scheduling another meeting for clarification, that sort of thing. You can try to delay it, or in rare instances, you can go ahead and defy what they're trying to do. It is not something that you want to do on any sort of regular basis, because if you do that more than a couple of times in a 3-month span of time, you will quickly get the reputation as somebody who can't be trusted to follow direction. And that's the death sentence in almost any organization. So follow your boss's instructions. Let your voice be heard. You can disagree with your boss and do it in a respectful way, or recommend a different course of action, that sort of thing. You can absolutely let your voice be heard. But generally, if it's not something that's against company policy or isn't breaking the law in any sort of way, I tend to follow what the boss says. There will be those rare instances where you can get away with not doing it, but those need to be very rare. Our next question comes from Shara. Her question is, how do you utilize staff that do not want to grow professionally? Shara, this is a great question because it's very common. There are a number of people, as many people that want to grow and become managers and become directors, vice presidents, CEOs, there's just as many people that are very content with where they are at. It suits their lifestyle. They don't want the challenge. They find challenge elsewhere. So it's something that's going to come up all of the time with it. The main thing, and again, this should really come across almost all of your employees, is you set the expectations of what needs to take place, you follow up with those expectations, and you meet with the employee regularly to go over those. With the really experienced employees, I also try to throw one thing in there to inspire them. They might not be inspired by professional growth, that sort of thing, but the expectation of their peers is something that they will respond to, and that is the most experienced people generally should be the best at doing their job. They know all of the tricks of the trade. They've been around the block a few times. They know what the customer wants, what the expectations of the boss and the company are. So they really should be the best. And it doesn't mean that you're holding them to a higher standard than other employees. They need to meet those expectations that every employee needs to meet, but you can try to inspire them in that way, that they really set the example as a veteran of the organization. But it's not something that I shy away from. There's many people that I've had on my teams that I thought would be absolutely amazing supervisors, managers, and be more of an asset to the company. And they just haven't shown the interest in it. And in those cases, maybe I've thrown them into relief positions to cover for vacations, that sort of thing. But let them be, hold them to the standard that you would hold every employee to, and go from there. Our next question comes from Emma. And it is, what ways can you rally urgency of tasks with staff when you've already discussed tasks face to face and in writing? Emma, good question. It's something that all of us struggle with, is the urgency and the priority of things. The first thing that I have to say is tasks should always come with deadlines. Every time you give a task, it needs to come with a deadline. That helps set the priority for everybody across the board. So your tasks, they come with deadlines. Now there's a second part of that that you need to follow up on, and that is you need to walk through the process with the employee so that they get that you can measure the buy-in that you're receiving from the employee. So set the deadline, walk through the process so that you both agree that the deadline isn't completely unreasonable. And then the third thing is missed deadlines have consequences. If they are not, that's an expectation that you should have an employee. If you've agreed to the deadline, you've agreed to the process that it's going to take, and you haven't been unreasonable, then missed deadlines have consequences. That can be discipline. That can be, taking away that duty from them being able to do in the future. But set the deadline, work through the process, and then have consequences if deadlines are missed. You have consequences if your deadlines are missed, so should your employees. Next question is from John Jacob. I will not sing the song. I will restrain myself, but which do you prefer, a strict or a kind manager, and who would have better results in the long run? So, great two-part question there. I think everybody likes the kind manager as opposed to the strict manager, so I really appreciate the second part of your question. I think either one is perfectly fine, quite frankly. I've had bosses that are kind, I've had bosses that are strict, and either one is fine. I can work with both of them. I personally take more of a kind route to it. That's my natural wheelhouse, is being empathetic to the employees, being understanding and working with them on that, as opposed to being strict. I don't like that negative feedback. One of the popular sayings that I have is you really have to outweigh the positive feedback you're giving employees as opposed to the negative feedback. And you really need to be looking at a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio of that, because we're terrible at measuring that ourselves and assessing that ourselves. So I try to stay away from the negative on it. I think, truthfully, the best leaders bounce between the two of them. They are kind and they are strict. I mean, I will tell you that when I do get strict as a leader, people pay a lot of attention to that because I'm not often in that sort of mode. But the best leader that I had was very strict. They went through the sort of process that I just went through on the prior question, where they set the expectation, they set the deadline, they went through the process, and then the expectation was that you met it. And you did not want to miss that deadline or fall short of that expectation. They were a great leader. Miss her terribly. But it's one of those things where you really kind of have to balance the two of them. You have to be empathetic, but you have to hold people accountable, because that's what holds the team together. As soon as people realize that they can get over on you and not meet expectations, that you're not going to be strict with them and holding them accountable or holding others accountable, then your productivity just starts falling apart. So I would encourage you to work on being both at the same time. Our last question comes from Adina, and it is, as a manager with tied hands, you know it's going to be a good question when it starts out like that, how do you help an owner see that his efforts at nepotism are harming the company? For those of us that work in small companies, this is a very common occurrence in any number of different ways, and it's definitely a challenge for those that are really trying to do their best and don't get that sort of favoritism that others do. What I recommend is really getting clear on what the goals are, the starting points, the ending points. What are the goals, and make metrics your friend. The best way you're not going to be able to reason with the boss in regards to nepotism Almost never will you be able to do that. But if you set clearly what the goals of the company are, what the goals of the project are, what the goals of everybody is, what the timeline is for that, and then you back that up with metrics, you will over time be able to show that this particular individual that is receiving the nepotism is not reaching the goals that the company has set, is not reaching those in the time frame that they're looking at, and is not hitting the metrics that they're supposed to be hitting. So try to get clear, do it, I don't want to say subtly, but I'll say subtly for lack of a better word, but do it conscientiously so that you're not stepping out and they get defensive on their decisions. But be patient with it, because over time you can show by making those little probing questions here and there and documenting those, you can show that Sonny Boy is not necessarily out of the same mold as the boss is. So it's a tough spot, but that's my advice for it. So again, I wanted to encourage everybody, if you have questions, go ahead and drop those down in the replies, and I'll go ahead and get to those in another episode. Otherwise, I wish everybody in the States a great Memorial Day weekend, and everybody else around the world a great weekend. Have a good one, and from sunny Las Vegas, I'm signing off.